So I would first like to start off by offering an apology of sorts. I have a story to share, and for some people, it may strike you as a little bit of lowbrow humor, but I promise it ties into the scripture reading. And being an educator, I'm all about object lessons. So here we go. I'd like to take you back to a simpler time. Well, less costly, maybe a little less turbulent time. We're going to go back to my seminary days in Massachusetts again. So, something that I always maintain from my past life in my evangelical tradition is how grateful I am for community, for the desire for community. And amidst all of the diversity and differing opinions, there was always a strive for that. The word community became our buzzword. At any given time, there are close to over 100 denominations represented where I went to seminary. Everything from folks like us in the UCC all the way to the most conservative, high church Roman Catholic planning to become a priest. You had a lot of variation there. When you add in some more diversity to that mix, you find students from every single corner of the globe. And this is all just on a tiny little campus on the North Shore of Boston. Just to give you an idea, my closest friend from seminary to this day comes from the tiny Balkan nation of North Macedonia. Thinking on my apartment floor, I had neighbors from Korea, Myanmar, China, South Africa, and not to mention all 50 states, all 13 provinces and territories from Canada. You name it, you could meet someone from there. So within this melee of friends, I became friends with a first generation American who was born to Indian parents. Now, for the purposes of this story, we'll call her Ria. Now, Ria was born blind, and everywhere you went, you saw Ria going with a walking stick. Her roommate, who was another wonderful addition to our community of friends, sort of became like a sister to her. So that meant the obvious things, helping Ria get across campus, getting to appointments in the city, and just being a generally awesome sister in Christ. However, those of us who have siblings can attest to this, that her roommate was like a sister in the fullest sense of the term. And before I go any further and share what I mean, please know this is all coming down to the fact that we all shared a very similar sense of humor. So, Ria, being born blind, often had people coming up to her and being very patronizing, very condescending, and no one knew how to roll with it like Ria. So I've got a few examples just to give you an idea. So having a lifetime of people always saying, "How are you? Are you okay?" This and that. She learned how to laugh, and one night a whole bunch of us got together and we had some new students joining us this particular semester, and we decided, hey, let's take them to the North Shore staple of Marty's Donuts. Now, Marty's Donuts was this little bakery in Ipswich that would open up at midnight because that's when they started all their baking. So usually between the hours of midnight and 3 a.m., several hundred seminarians would descend and buy up all the donuts. I mean, for $1 a piece, that big, I mean, you do the math. So one night, we all got there, and I had a bunch of new students in my vehicle with me and Ria's roommate, and we get out, and we're all getting ready to go in. And we're here in the car, sidewalk, donut shop. Ria gets out, goes, "Oh, I forgot, it's midnight." So her roommate goes, "Don't worry, I got you." Starts walking further, further, further. She's getting further and further away from the door. The freshmen are terrified at this point as what's going on. Ria walks into the wall. They go running. She whips around and goes, "It's fine. We walk by faith." Yeah. Another time, a few weeks later, we were sitting in the cafeteria, sitting around studying, And another of our friends comes in and says, "Hey, have you seen so-and-so?" Without missing a beat, Rhea looks up and goes, "Why would you ask the blind girl if she's seen someone?" The panic ensues. "I'm just kidding." And then my personal favorite, my last semester there, we got an email from campus safety saying, "Please be careful when going around campus. There is a flock of wild turkeys and they are violent." So my friend Rhea said, "I have an idea." We look, and one day she is going across the campus, doing her thing, and there's something swinging off of her cane there. Also in this email, we were told that bright reflecting things tend to agitate the turkeys and they will come running. She was ready and waiting. She had a mirror hanging off of her cane so it would reflect the sun so she could do a little turkey golf. Don't know if she was successful. So the reasons that I share all of these stories about my good friend is because everyone else looked at her and only saw one thing. And that one thing was her physical blindness. But to her, it wasn't something that she saw as a detriment to who she was or who God created her to be. Anyone who spends 5 minutes in Rhea's presence, not only will you laugh, as you all can attest, I mean, it's like that from the jump, but anyone who is in her presence feels the Spirit of God alive and well in that beating heart. Now, as I said, people often were very patronizing. She called them the seers. And as I mentioned, patronizing often crossed into condescending, and people treated her like a porcelain doll that was about to break. And the kicker was one day, someone flat out told her that her lack of healing was due to a lack of faith. You ever seen a TV show when like a record screeches to a halt? That, yeah, that happened. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, this is happening. And without me missing a beat, my friend Rhea says, "Healed from what exactly?" And in this particular day, I should also mention Rhea comes from a charismatic tradition. She may have spoken in tongues a little just to drive her point home. All good fun, allegedly. So much like the gospel reading from today, modern believers were kind of wide of the mark. The whole not being able to see the forest for the trees idiom sort of comes to mind when I think about this. That's what happens when I try to go off script a little. So as Jesus and the disciples are walking along this dusty road, they encounter this blind man. Eventually, the religious leaders try to catch Jesus up with a question about his condition, his blindness, more importantly, his sin. To the religious leader, sin is something which is clearly defined and in turn can be quantified, objectified, and weaponized. That's been going on for as long as it's been an option. On the flip side of that, sin has purification and sanctification, and that can also be quantified and defined. In this particular setting, there is a defined religious system-based method for being cleansed of sin. Temple rituals for atoning for sins of the people are laid down in Levitic law. It's predictable. It's institutionalized comfort for many. Come to find out, though, it's also quite restrictive for a God that likes to flip our systems of power and oppression on their heads over and over and over again. When the question of where did this man's sin come from gets asked, those asking are looking for an answer that would either seal Jesus' authority as a teacher, or the more likely response and goal here, it would serve as a trap to trap Jesus in a legalistic web to prove that he was himself a sinner and therefore a fraud, and therefore incompatible with righteousness. So when faced with this situation and this quandary, Jesus answers by doing that thing he is so good at. He takes the established precedent, he takes what has been accepted as truth and bends it to let the light in. He says, neither this man's sin nor his parents' sin caused him to be blind. Many have misinterpreted Jesus' response of he was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him as the miracle of sight restoration. And now, while that is, in fact, a miracle, I personally believe it's very lazy exegesis to leave it at just that. Lazy exegesis has led to misinterpretations that paint an anti-Semitic narrative towards Judaism at worst, and at best, kind of illustrates the point that Jesus is ultimately getting at here. You see, while our sacred texts are full of big cataclysmic events that highlight the awesome power of God, they're also full of average people who definitely didn't have the answers, but they still said yes, in spite of everything in their world saying to the contrary. They said yes. They said yes to what the Spirit of God was doing around them. And that is where the average and unassuming becomes incredible, because that is where the light shines the greatest. The man wasn't afflicted with blindness at birth so that he could wander his life without sight for that exact moment when Jesus walked by, so that Jesus could show he was some kind of superhero. He was born blind simply because he was born blind. It wasn't an outward reflection of an inward spiritual corruption or blindness. He just happened to be this way in a world that is very obsessed with seeing and hearing and tasting. Others around him looked at this image bearer of God and said, "You lack." Now in this situation, much like today, we often struggle with the why of someone we love not being considered normal or whole in our eyes. Honestly, whatever that phrase even means. They become reduced to characteristics, traits, or symptoms. On the spiritual side of things, a sense of unmet expectations can easily take root and turn our hearts bitterly away from God's grace and love. We may even believe some of these things about ourselves, and in turn, we slam the door shut on our own opportunities for God's grace on the spiritual journey. This self-inflicted spiritual blindness means that we house a mind and a heart that ignore the beauty of the Spirit all around us. And the worst part is, we don't even notice that we're doing it. In the text, Jesus heals the blind man not by waving his hand or whispering a magic incantation. He scoops up some mud from the ground, spits in it, and then rubs the man's eyes. And then he sends him to Siloam to wash the mud away. And as we know, upon his return, he can see. Now, rather than seeing this for what this is, God at work in a hurting world transforming lives, rather than accepting what is right before their eyes and leaning into this mysterious God of love, the theological bumpers with the religious leaders go up and they keep the blindness going. We have an account of God reaching down to the literal dirt to lift up the downtrodden, and the religious leaders react by going, no, not that way. Don't do it like that. The man who can now see is interrogated by the religious leaders. His responses do not add up to the human equation of exercising God's redemption. They even haul his parents in because they believe this to be some first century fake news. The religious leaders then claim their authority from Moses, which gives them eminence. It gives them power. It puts a contrast between them and this man who has been healed from blindness. God spoke directly to Moses, the lawgiver, and as high priests, these men believe they're doing the same. They tell the once blind man that there's no source for Jesus' authority, so you can't be sent from God. Even when there is a physical representation, even when there is evidence in front of them, they say, no. Even when there is righteous sounding religious terminology, the hardened heart betrays the very human emotion of, I want it my way. Even when we are face to face with God's transformative work, rather than leaning into the waves of love and grace, we try to contain it in whatever confines we think will bring us fulfillment. The healed man didn't have any kind of acceptable answer for the Pharisees, so they accused him of blasphemy and expelled him from the synagogue. This right here just kind of reads as a very quick little passage in the account, but at this stage of life in humanity, this is the focal point. This is what gives the first century Judean's life meaning. And it was taken from him. He was turned out. He was cast away because. The more I read this and the more I sat with this, the more I couldn't help but feel how much this tugs at the heart. How often have we, in 2023, heard stories of individuals or groups of people who were cast out for not fitting the mold? I mean, to be perfectly honest, we could sit here for days and share stories. The church has a voluminous history of saying, no, not like that, to anything and everything that didn't fit into the parameters of acceptable. Why? I think that has a lot of answers, but the fundamental is that humanity likes comfort, humanity likes influence, humanity likes power and institutions that preserve all of those things. Now, the big spoiler alert in all of this is that no matter who, what, or how institutions try to marginalize or erase those that they deem sinful, Jesus will constantly choose the side of the marginalized. After the synagogue had expelled the blind man and turned him away from everything in his life, cut him off, at the end of the passage we read, Jesus goes to him. Jesus seeks him out. And once they encounter each other, he doesn't put purity requirements on him. He doesn't interrogate him for information about his spiritual journey. He simply finds this man where he is, and exactly as he is. The man doesn't have a pharisaical correct answer. He just has a heart that has clearly been touched by this mysterious God of love who looks at our human attempts at righteousness and purity and goes, that's nice. The human way of being good cast this man away. His creator, our creator, seeks him out and holds space for those that are called beloved. So when I made the decision a few years ago to stop lying to myself and everyone and step into the light of who God created me to be as a gay man, it didn't go so great in my past life. As I listened to people I once called siblings talk about me like some long, far-gone vermin, I couldn't help but circle back to the reality. God delights in me. God delights in you. God delights in every single one who bears God's image. That's everybody. Where I once made myself physically ill with worry over whether or not I was getting it right, and also whether or not someone would find out my deeply held secret, I could feel the presence of a lively, loving spirit saying, you got it, kid. Where the disappointed stares and vicious whispers once made me feel worthless, God says, I am here because I love you. I am here for you. I am not here for condemnation. When others seek to root out what they perceive as sinful, broken behavior, keeping us all back from God, God says, but my child, you're not broken. I'm right here. God delights in all of us as we are because that is how God made us. When we deny that powerful reality, we dim the light of God reflecting amidst God's beloved. When we deny that for others, well, that's where I would argue that sin enters. When it's dim and dark, we can't see. As we fumble in the dark, we try to steady ourselves in any way we can, even if that means stepping on our siblings in the process. Now, the way out of this self-inflicted darkness starts here with ourselves. It starts with leaning into the truth about God's relationship to God's beloved. And like I said, that means all of you. Spirit-filled people are people constantly trying to lean into the God of love, the God of joy, and the God of peace for themselves and their communities. The blind man in the story had likely had a lifetime of people treating him in ways contrary to how we are called to love. The representatives of the temple proclaiming God's presence among God's people cast him out, separated him from God in their eyes. And Jesus sought him out with open arms. My friend from seminary was used as an object lesson in not having enough faith to be delivered. According to her, God never left her because God was there from the beginning. Even though she would joke about saying, walk by faith, she means it to this day. I once read a quote that said, so many people are blind to God at work in the world because they spend all of their time either chasing sins in others or looking for the devil. And I would have to say, whoever said this was definitely onto something, because I think we can all attest that that mindset of, if I'm just good enough, if I just manage this sinful behavior enough, it'll be okay. It doesn't have to be that. When we focus on those things, we lose sight. Now, taking this to a little bit of an extreme, something I hear often is Christians saying how we as a nation have fallen so far away from the truth and we've got to go back. So, in light of what we were just talking about with faith becoming just sin management and pushing the light out, we see that a lot. So to these people that say, God is not here, we've abandoned God, God has abandoned us, whatever, however you want to package it, I would say, no, firstly, God doesn't abandon, God doesn't leave. People may let you down, God does not. And secondly, I would ask them, back to what exactly? Back to a time when women were seen and not heard, women who are made in the image of God and yet are silenced, when Bible-toting white people defended the institutions of slavery and then Jim Crow as moral and just? Do we need to go back to times when countless LGBTQIA children were told that part of themselves was demonic, vile, and evil, and that God hated them? That last one I have personal experience with, and it was often done with a smile. To all of this, I would say, God is not static. God doesn't dwell in the trappings or institutions of power. God doesn't dwell in getting your theology 100% correct. God was present. God dwelled in some spit and some mud. Two things that we as humans often describe the word icky to. Really, God tends to not dwell anywhere that we as humans ascribe divinity to. God dwells amidst the blind, amidst the sick, amidst the hurting, the scared, the persecuted, the marginalized, the downtrodden, and God dwells amongst all of us. With all of this said, may we remember to take the blinders off of our own hearts first and then off of our eyes. May we remember to be open to what the Spirit is doing, even if it doesn't look like we expect it to, even if it doesn't fit. Trust that God knows what God is doing. If we get lost in the dark, look for the light.